Today we're talking about this, Tamron's new 90mm macro. This is their DI Mark III VXD. This is for Sony E-mount, and there's a Nikon Z-mount version as well. And for me, I was looking at this to see if it was sort of a up-to-date, refresh, improved version of the Sony 90mm macro G OSS lens that I've been using for a really long time. I've called this maybe my favorite Sony lens, if not like definitely top 3, but it is feeling a little bit old and long in the tooth, or so I thought, until I compared it to the new one. Anyway, there is also significant price difference between these two lenses. So I wanted to test it and see, is this a viable, cheaper option and possibly better than the Sony G? But for disclosure, Tamron did lend me this lens to make this review. It goes back after I'm done. I don't get to keep it. I have done some sponsored work with Tamron in the past, but for this video, Tamron doesn't get any input on this video's production, and they don't get to see it before it's posted. This video does have an actual sponsor though, and that's Storyblocks. Now, let's talk a little bit about the differences spec-wise between the two. So they're very similar in terms of size and weight. The Tamron for Sony E is going to be 630 grams, where the old Sony lens is 602, so not a huge difference there. Front filter diameter is a little bit different. The new Tamron has a 67mm front filter, where the old Sony had a less favorable 62mm. The Tamron minimum aperture is f16, where with the Sony you can get down to f22, if that's important to you. And then the iris blades are different. You're definitely going to see this when we get into the sample images. On the Sony, it's only a 9-bladed iris, which is showing some weakness. On the Tamron, it's a 12-bladed iris, which is interesting because I just did a Sigma lens review recently where they used the 12-bladed iris for the first time, and the Tamron has one here. And then the autofocus motors are different. This is with Tamron's new VXD. It's one of their linear motors, so it's, you know, super fast, quiet, everything. Where the Sony uses their direct drive supersonic motor, which is a bit old compared to the focus motors that Sony is using these days. And then lastly, the only real difference functionality-wise is that the Sony has OSS. It has stabilization in the lens, where the Tamron does not. But it didn't really lead that much of a difference in result. If we do a bit of a refresher for what was available on the Sony lens, you've got a function button, you've got your focus range selector switch, and then a switch for the stabilizer on and off. And then the best part about the Sony lens was this, a focus clutch. When you switch it down there, it's in manual focus with hard stops that also stop right at the 1:1 reproduction ratio. So you could set it to 1:1, have it locked in manual focus, and then just get as close until the image is in focus and take the image. Well, what about the Tamron? What do we have over here? Well, similarly, we still have the focus range selector. So again, same purpose, full range, more of a macro range, and then more of a portrait range. We have the function button. We have a focus ring. We don't have an autofocus manual focus selector. On the Sony, the clutch is also the selector. On this one, there isn't one, so you have to do it in the camera. This little USB-C port down here is actually pretty sweet because when I first connected this, I noticed the focus response is nonlinear, meaning that if you turn it a little bit or turn it slowly, it performs differently than if you turn it quickly. So repeatable focus is garbage, and the focus throw was not where I would like it to be for a macro lens. And then I downloaded the new Tamron app. It loaded up on my phone, and I could just switch it to linear focus response and change the focus throw distance. And just immediately, it was now a linear response. That is excellent as far as user experience goes. So I'm really happy with that. So now I do have a linear, nicely thrown lens. I just don't have the focus clutch. So as you can see, I have quite a few image quality comparisons to go over. But before we start there, I want to talk a little bit more about the focus because the minimum focus distance between these two lenses is different, which is kind of strange considering they're the same height, they have the same focal length, they have the same macro reproduction. On the Tamron, the new lens, it's 23 centimeters or 9.1 inches, and on the older Sony, it's 28 centimeters or 11 inches. So you get closer physically on the Tamron, which of course has proved to be an issue when I was trying to do the comparison images, because if I do them on a tripod at minimum focus, I have to then move the tripod when I switch lenses. And I found this kind of strange. To show you what I'm talking about, if you put them both at the same distance where the Sony can focus, this is how much sort of wider the Tamron is. And I believe this is down to focus breathing. The Tamron exhibits a lot less focus breathing than the Sony did. I'll put a clip on the screen now of me racking focus and video from minimum to infinity on both. Focus breathing is when you do focus from minimum to infinity, that the lens almost looks like it's zooming, your field of view changes. It does prove to be an issue, especially on that minimum side for macro, a big issue rather. This here, I was going to start focus at minimum and then focus stack using bracketing in the camera all the way back and then stack them up in post. And on each lens, it was basically impossible. If I jump to the next frame, you can see as I go back and forth how much breathing is taking place just between these two particular planes. These don't stack up well. So the only way you're gonna be able to get either of these lenses to work for that kind of focus stacking is by putting them on rails and then moving through the subject. So yes, the focus breathing is improved on the Tamron, and that might benefit you with some, medium range video tracking, but it certainly isn't enough to get a pass for focus stacking. It just doesn't work. But since I don't have Rails to stack focus that way, I probably should have just downloaded my macro circuit board images from Storyblocks, the sponsor of today's video, a stock media platform that offers unlimited downloads of diverse and high quality content for one predictable subscription cost. But Storyblocks offers a whole lot more than just macro shots of trace and capacitors. In fact, their library houses over 1 million HD and 4K video files, images, and motion graphics templates. And jokes aside, those motion graphics have actually saved me time on previous projects, especially now that they added DaVinci Resolve templates, much better than my previous and tedious method of making those graphics in Photoshop and then animating them in the Edit tab using keyframes. Plus, anything you download from Storyblocks is 100% royalty-free with clear-cut licensing, so you can focus on creating, not worrying about usage rights. The platform is incredibly easy to use, and the library is frequently restocked with commissioned content based on customer demand to ensure you'll have access to files that are not only high quality, but fresh and diverse. So to get started with unlimited stock media downloads at one set price, head to storyblocks.com/undone or click the link in the description. Okay, let's get back into Lightroom. One last image of macro circuitry. I decided to do a flat plane one, since that way I didn't have to focus stack. Bonus points if somebody in the comments can recognize what this PCB is from. But yeah, the detail is superb. This is the Tamron at f5.6. It looks excellent. Bokeh, for those that don't know, longitudinal chromatic aberration is when an image, when it goes out of focus to the foreground and the background, adds fringing. This can generally only be resolved by stopping down, so you don't want a lot of it when shooting wide open. The Tamron, I think, is going to be on the left in pretty much every one of these comparisons to make that easier. Let's punch right in here. You can see neither lens is terrible for Bokeh, but I do believe the Tamron has served up a minor improvement here. I see a little bit more of a reddish hue on the Sony, and maybe I can see a little bit more in this direction as well. Both are passable for sure, but the Tamron is a few percent better, so that's only good news, I suppose. And then at minimum focus compensated for that different distance, so I made them both at their relative minimum, and then I just wanted to check to see sharpness when shooting a flat plane at minimum. I think they're focused about here. Again, both look incredibly sharp. I would say we have a pretty close match here. If we move out toward the corner of the frame, I do believe the Sony falls off a little bit sooner than the Tamron does. It's minor, but I would say the Tamron retains its sharpness in the corner a little bit better. When comparing that focus chart from earlier, but now with both images at their relative minimum focus, again, if we punch in the middle, they look darn near the same. As we go up a little bit here, we can see that maybe the Tamron stays a little bit sharper than the Sony, but again, very minor differences. Now this next section here is interesting. This is more to test stabilization. So what I did is I shot each one of the lenses at really slow shutter speeds, but the Sony had the OSS enabled and the Tamron didn't, to see if it made a difference for me just hand holding. So starting here, this is 1/20th of a second. And to be honest, I don't notice a huge difference. If anything, I would say it was maybe slightly less shaky on the Tamron, but that could just be variance in the test. They look about the same. I did slightly better with the Tamron at 1/10th of a second than I did on the Sony, even though it has OSS. And then lastly, down to 1/5 of a second, I did significantly worse with the Tamron. So maybe at this crazy shutter speed, we start to see a slight advantage to the OSS on the Sony. But basically, I wouldn't stress about it. And these tests were done on the Alpha 1. So I would say if you're putting either of these lenses on a modern Sony body, that likely the OSS is not going to make a huge difference and the body's going to do the majority of the work unless you're shooting down at 1/5 of a second. Now let's talk about bokeh, because this is a huge difference, because again, the Tamron has a 12-bladed iris and the Sony is lacking with its 9-bladed iris. And can you tell which one of these two has the 9-bladed iris? I mean, look at these just like uneven, wobbly little bokeh balls over here, and then how smooth the Tamrons are. As far as quality and consistency, the Sony ones are okay. The Tamrons are actually smoother and nicer. There's almost none of that onion ringing that you see a little bit of it in the Sony. And adjusting the frame a little bit here to see how quickly it cuts in for cat's eye, the Tamron does significantly better for cat's eye too. Like we're almost round right to the edge there, where the Sony starts cutting in all the way over here. And if we stop down to 5.6, we can physically see the 12 iris blades over here versus the 9 over here. Again, a much smoother shape on the Tamron. And then an extreme test by putting it at minimum and putting them in the corners. Again, the Tamron does much better for that cat's eye cut in than the Sony does. Let's talk for a second here about distortion and vignetting. Neither of these images have their profiles enabled in Lightroom. There is a profile for the Sony, and when I enable it, it makes the image look more like the Tamron. You can see that the Sony is a bit darker in the corners than the Tamron is. The Tamron has better peripheral illumination. As far as distortion goes, though, I would say they're both about the same, just very minimal barrel distortion. Both are excellent for distortion. Both are pretty darn good for vignetting as well, but the Tamron is slightly better uncorrected. And now let's talk about Sunstars, because that's where you're going to see that 12-bladed iris do its strangeness. So Sunstars with 12-bladed iris, they don't have they don't have the spokes in between. They have sort of thicker, more distinct ones. And so it looks like this. It's actually kind of a cool look. I've come to like it on that Sigma lens I tested recently. The Sunstars on the Sony 90mm are just, this is not good. If you're trying to shoot the sun, this is not the look you're going for usually. So the Tamron wins here, full stop. And the Tamron also wins in the flare department. If you have the sun cut off a little bit, cutting across the frame, you get this green pollution from the Sony. I would say maybe a similar amount of artifacts, maybe slightly a few more artifacts on the Sony, but just an overall corruption of your image where the Tamron does a lot better. And even if you ease up a little bit to make the test easier, the Sony has sort of this laser beam that shoots across the frame, and the artifacts can show the 9-bladed iris, and they just become a lot more, geometric and intrusive, where the Tamron is better. But those were all forced hard tests to make it look bad. If we do a more practical sort of backlit thing where the sun is there, and in this case the subject was the lens, I don't know. I do think the Tamron is better. I'm still seeing some of that green pollution here on. Try not to get confused. This is the Sony image of the Tamron lens, and on the Sony image, there's some of that green pollution where the Tamron does look a little bit more natural, and we do probably have better tonality here. And then as far as the artifacts are concerned, they're maybe about the same, but again, just there's like one extra, or it's slightly more intrusive on the Sony. So the flare is better on the Tamron, and this is a bit more of a practical comparison of what you can see. I think I like the image on the left better. And then lastly, I just have some samples taken just on the Tamron to show you some focus transitions and some of the color rendering. Focus transitions are really pleasing, and the greens are rich. Same here. These have more extreme focus transitions, and I think they're still handled pretty okay. With macro, you have to, usually your focus transitions are so stark that they can be not great, which is why people focus stack in the first place. But I think for what it is, these are about as smooth as you're going to get. So that's not bad at all. And this one here is a mixture to show you some detail, but also just how, buttery we can make the background. And again, I think we get really, really good results. Incredible sharpness, very great control of these fine little strands here, and super smooth background. Looks great. Some blues for you. This was actually shot from inside my fridge with a melting water drop. The detail here is insane. It's so good. It just captured every little bit of everything. Orange, bright orange. Oranges look great. We got some yellow in the background. Again, really good focus transitions, good detail. There's not much that is in focus here because of how thin the focus plane is, but you can see the stuff that is very, very sharp. Looks good. Here is the side of a kiwi. Check this out. Doesn't this look wild? Kind of looks like soil with like roots growing out of it, and then you realize that it's the side of a kiwi. But again, look at this focus fall off. Super smooth. On this one, I actually missed focus on the Hornet. Well, a little bit. I didn't get the plane right, but I kept it because I really like what it was doing here with these little tendrils sticking out of the dandelion. I think that they look really cool, and I actually don't mind this part. I like the little pollen floating around. This one I thought turned out pretty good. We got the eyes pretty good there. Still got those tendrils. I like the contrast between the green and the yellow. The oranges look great. Just really, really rich color. Fantastic. And then this one, I don't know, this photo's boring, but I haven't ever really taken a macro photo of a fly before, and I was like, ew, gross. Look at these weird hairs on its back. Guess I just wanted to share that with you. The flies are gnarly looking. But you can see the transition to autofocus here. There's not much else to really show you in this shot. Oh, and I didn't even really elaborate on the autofocus. I mentioned that the Tamron even has, better autofocus motors with their new VXD linear motors. But I did do a couple tests. I did this sort of like racking focus quickly. And the Sony was still reliable. You could just see it move the glass a little bit. It was quick, but you could see it. Where the Tamron was just instant. It's almost like a teleporter. You couldn't see the glass move. It was so fast. But I wouldn't say that made a huge difference for the type of imagery that you're likely doing with this lens. I mean, I suppose this one's fast enough now that you could use it for something a bit more action-y, where this one maybe not as much. But for portraiture, they're both still fast enough. And even in video, I did some walking at the camera tests, and again, I found both to be pretty similar. Maybe the Tamron has a slight edge. So like I said, it's pretty much nothing but upsides to the Tamron. I wouldn't say that there's such huge upsides that I would, get rid of my Sony lens to get the Tamron, but if you're somebody who didn't pick up the Sony because it was too expensive, or you just didn't really want to commit that kind of money to a macro lens that maybe you were only going to use occasionally, last time I checked, the Sony was $1,100 US. The new Tamron is coming in at $700 US. So that's significantly cheaper and a much easier pill to swallow if you wanted to experiment with macro. And again, this isn't really, there's no downsides. You're just saving money to get an equally performing lens, or better in many ways. So this is a slam dunk from Tamron. And this is coming from somebody who, has called the Sony 90mm macro like my favorite macro lens. So good work all around. I really enjoyed my time with it. It made me want to get out and shoot, which says something for me. Yeah, great lens. Good job, Tamron. Thanks for watching. All right, I'm done.